This week on the It's a Monkey podcast.
Really aligning what you're doing, your actions, with your deeply held values is very much, a successful strategy that you can adapt to lots of different types of tasks. So just as you've indicated, if you find it challenging to set aside the time to exercise, but you can reframe that mentally as you're actually serving the goals that you care about most, that's a great way to do it.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Kevin Garber. It is Friday, the 24th of February. The month and the year is screaming past us. It is the It's a Monkey podcast, episode number 82. Thank you for joining us. As always, we've got a fantastic show lined up for you. But before we get into the show, just want to welcome my regular co-host, Kate Frappell, who is the design lead at ManageFlitter. ManageFlitter. Thanks for joining us, Kate.
Thanks for having me.
We're not periscoping today, so it actually feels a little bit naked. I'm so used to periscoping live and seeing the few people that pop up and the one or two comments. Not periscoping today because we're under a little time pressure. We don't. This is not our day job. We do this as a side effort, and sometimes the real world gets in the way. Anyway, it's episode number 82, and we got a great show lined up for you. Later on in the show, I chat with Monique Valcour, who's an executive coach, management academic, Harvard Business Review contributor, and I talk with Monique about work-life balance. It's this term that gets thrown around a lot. It is spoken about a lot in our industry, in the tech startup world, in the professional world in general. And Monique's actually done some research around this. She has worked for many years with people around the issue of, and organizations around the issue of work-life balance, around burnout, things like that. So we're going to be chatting to her later on in the show. But as usual, we talk about some of the goings-ons in our fantastic, fast-moving industry. We talk about a couple of news items. Kate, this week, WhatsApp is getting on the Snapchat Stories bandwagon. So Snapchat's been around for a while. Started out as the first ephemeral social media app where you could send people a photo with some text that would disappear over a period of time. And then they rolled out a feature called Stories where you could put one or many photos for all your Snapchat contacts. Then this story, so to speak, would last for about 24 hours.
Yep.
And then it would disappear. And a lot of other social media networks have been copying the stories idea, namely Instagram copied them. I think even Facebook has some version that I haven't explored. And now WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook, has announced that they're launching something similar to Snapchat Stories called Status.
Yes. So the difference with WhatsApp is that it's also encrypted, same as their messages. They released like a beta version in November, and now they've gone live, I guess, and everyone's starting to use it.
And they said they're rolling it out globally. We've tried to check if it's on our phones. You got an iOS. It hasn't been sent to yours. No. I've got an Android. Hasn't been sent to mine. So they're obviously still busy rolling it out. So we haven't had a chance to try it, unfortunately. But from the screenshots, it looks quite simple, quite straightforward. WhatsApp has got a huge user group across the world. So it's going to be interesting to see the uptake of this feature.
1.2 billion users, to be exact. And yeah, the interesting thing is that WhatsApp have users in parts of South America, Eastern Europe, and the developing world where Snapchat doesn't have traction yet. So this will be the first time that they interact with the idea of ephemeral content and disappearing photos and stories.
It's going to be really interesting to see the uptake of that. And Snapchat is going to be listing soon. So it's going to be, they're under a lot of pressure. The consumer social media moves very fast. They all get inspiration and copy each other. So it's going to be interesting to see who's going to be the last person standing at the end of the day. And it's tricky when they start just copying each other, so to speak, and I think Snap will, we mentioned on the last podcast, your Snap's going to be okay if they don't get into this race, so to speak, of features and just keep on engaging with their users, building a brand and seeing what they can offer and trying to stay, fresh and differentiate themselves, not just cloning each other.
Yeah. The unfortunate thing for Snapchat is that they started this idea. They're one of the original people doing it, and Facebook and Instagram, WhatsApp, which are all owned by Facebook, have essentially copied them. So now they have to do the hard work to think of something that makes them different.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm going to keep an eye on my WhatsApp and see if when we roll out that feature, and we'll report back here. Another quite a fun story, Nokia. Now, for those of us old enough to predate the iPhone era of 2007, most of us at some stage had a Nokia, right? And Nokia announced that they're going to be relaunching the iconic 3310, which is that famous little LCD screened, palm-sized Nokia that we all had. I mean, I think I had many. They sort of lasted forever.
Yes.
So later on this month is the annual Mobile World Congress or conference. I think it happens in Spain, in Barcelona, and a lot of these companies use this as an opportunity to launch new products and new initiatives. And this 3310 is going to be relaunched at Mobile World this month.
Yeah, so there's been a leak by someone called Evan Blass, and he said that, they're introducing the 3310 alongside some new Android-based smartphones, so Nokia 3, 6, and 5. So I can't help but think it's sort of a marketing ploy. But at the same time, there's plenty of sort of older markets that would enjoy a simple phone, I think.
Yeah, and I think some people even, there's been a bit of a backlash towards simplicity, and some people might even just want a phone, just to text maybe. I don't see younger generations really, because people don't call anymore and they don't even text anymore. So for a lot of people, it will be pretty useless unless they really only use it for calling, or maybe someone very young, a kid for a security for safety purposes. They can teach it.
Yeah, they used to have they used to market particular phones for kids so that they couldn't, rack up ridiculous bills and stuff
and have one button or two buttons just to call home and call the police or something like that.
Exactly, and now in the age of smartphones, the Nokia is sort of that phone now. So they're afraid of their kids racking up, their bill on data. But now you could give them one that made calls and sent texts, and give them $30 prepaid, and that's it. It's really not going to cost them that much.
I saw such a young kid on the train yesterday or the day before, trying to work out how young. It's hard for me to judge if this kid was 7, 8, 9, or 10, and he was chatting away on his fancy phone. It looked a little bit. I was quite surprised that someone that young. What age do kids get phones these days?
I don't know. I mean, I got my first Nokia actually when I started year 7, so the beginning of high school.
Right. So that's year 7's about 12, 13.
Yeah, I was about 13 at the time. Yeah. It was probably the first color screen Nokia.
Right.
Was my first phone.
Right.
And then this one, the 3310, was probably the version before it, because I know my parents had it.
My first mobile phone was a Motorola with the flip sort of bottom, but it was a brick. This was in the 90s.
I do recall that.
Yeah, and but before that, even my father in South Africa was one of the first to have a car phone before mobile phones.
Yeah.
And it was so novel that people used to walk past his car and see the phone, and it was mounted, right? And they would stop and they would look inside and they'd call their friends. And it's hard to believe now. It sounds like a lifetime away, but people were incredibly intrigued by the fact that you had a phone in a car.
Yeah, I think my dad had one too.
Yeah?
I remember it. It was a big black chunky thing with one of those spirally cords.
And it had to be installed properly, and it was better. But for people that were on the go a lot, it even though the calls were very expensive, it was quite useful for people that would work from the car. So it's come a long way.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing the 3310 would have to do at this stage is make it compatible with a modern SIM card, connect it to the 4G network, and possibly come up to speed with some modern messaging standards. And then otherwise, it's really selling itself on the durability and battery life.
Battery life, of course. Everyone's critical of battery life, and everyone thinks that battery life's so bad now, but it's not at all. Battery life's fantastic. It's just these things that we have, full screens and all sorts of functionalities. If you would use a modern Android or iPhone battery with one of those old Nokias, it would probably last for a year. I'm not even exaggerating. It'd be interesting to see. If you keep your phone on airline mode, right, it basically just keeps on going. I've tried it even when my Android's on 1% and you put it on airplane mode, I'll just go for hours. The battery life's actually really good. The consumption is just incredibly huge with our screens and the Wi-Fi and the strong 4G networks and the processor that generates heat and things like that.
It's true. Someone made a comment too that the benefit of the Nokias back in the day too was that everyone had basically the same phone and you could take the battery out. So you could pack multiple batteries or you could borrow your friend's battery and then message from there or use your phone if you ran out of juice, But now there's no way you can do that.
They all glued in. I mean, even some of the early Android phones, you could swap batteries. Even with my HTC a few years ago, you could carry multiple batteries and charge them up. And now they don't. I think maybe for water, I think if they seal the phone, it makes it more watertight and things don't move around. And so I don't know any phones now these days where you can change the battery. But a few years ago, even you could. So yeah, the phones were much simpler back then. My favorite phone was still the Siemens SL35, I think it was called. It was a tiny phone, robust as all hell, and it was one of the first phones that could play an MP3.
Nice.
And I used to impress my friends by just saying, come over here, put these headphones on. And they're like, is your phone playing music? And it's not that long ago. I know I sound like a dinosaur talking about these things, but and I was checking email on there before anyone else. And people, I would say, I was checking email on the ferry. By the time I get into the office, I've checked my emails. So I enjoyed the utility that these technologies brought, and you could almost see the wave coming. It was just the UIs were pretty basic, and you had to be a little bit of a tech head to navigate through them.
Sure.
And then, of course, the iPhone came and just blew it out of the water because anyone could use this. And
what's interesting though is even if you think about all the phones that you've had over your life, the actual physical design and shape of that phone changes quite significantly. Like I went from a brick to a slidey one. My friends had flip phones. And then as soon as sort of the iPhone came along, it hasn't changed all that much.
Hardly.
Like it's one big screen and that's it.
Hardly. They've gotten bigger.
Yeah, sure.
They've gotten bigger, but besides that, they haven't changed at all.
Yeah, in terms of like compartments and stuff no, the same sort of shape and style has stayed.
It's almost like the innovation is a step graph, right? So it linearly or exponentially goes up and then it plateaus and plateaus and then it waits for the next Steve Jobs to come through with some breakthrough and then it steps up and everyone copies and gets on the bandwagon and goes, and then it's even like airplanes, the jet plane, the 747 was released in 1969. Hasn't changed that much, like there's a bit more efficiency and things, but it's not air travel. The times are pretty similar. The limitations are pretty similar. And over 40 years later, not much has changed, but yet until between, when the Wright brothers, whenever that was, in 1969, the innovation was incredibly fast, from biplanes to props to turbojets and jets, and so it's interesting, the innovative forces. It's really interesting to see the velocity and the rates of change and how some things get stuck and others don't. Yeah.
The one thing I miss the most though is Snake.
I'm sure you can play it. I play Pac-Man on Facebook Messenger, and it's really it's the absolute got it to the T. It's like
Yeah,
exactly the
it
same.
wouldn't be the same. Colored version with all the super graphics would not be the same as that little dotted line that went around on the. Do you remember the old Snake?
I do.
Yeah,
I do.
nothing's going to beat that. I would buy the new 3310 just for Snake.
The Nokia Snake. Talk about games on phones, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's you're listening to Kevin Garber. I'm the CEO of ManageFlitter, and Kate Frappell, who's the design lead at ManageFlitter. And we enjoyed putting this podcast together for you. I hope you're enjoying the show. You can always email us at podcast@itsamonkey.com. You can tweet us at monkeypodcast. Someone tweeted us about the Phil Libin episode, Kate, and said she really enjoyed it. And she's a huge user of Evernote. And if you want to listen to previous podcast episodes, go to itsamonkey.com. Got some fantastic previous episodes, including our record-breaking interview with David Hannemeyer Hansen, where the stats they've just gone nuts. Through the roof, breaking all of our records. I'd love to have David on again and talk more about leadership and their product and things like that. So maybe I'll be able to twist his arm. And we've got some great interviews coming up in the next few weeks as well, which will be revealed as they happen in the pipeline. We're going to take a short break, and after we come back from the break, we're going to be talking about work-life balance with Monique Valcour, who's done some research in the area. She's a Harvard Business Review contributor. She's an academic. She's an executive coach, and does all sorts of exciting bits and pieces relating to the area of work-life balance. So stay with us. We'll be back shortly.
Hi, this is Dave with ManageFlitter. ManageFlitter is a tool that helps you work smarter and faster on Twitter. With ManageFlitter, you can clean up and grow your Twitter account. You'll also get useful Twitter analytics, social content scheduling, and much more. Go to ManageFlitter.com and start your free trial today.
You're back with It's a Monkey podcast. Now, we talk about everything related to tech, economy, entrepreneurship, and our industry is famous for working hard and needing to work hard and to escape and to get what we call escape velocity and product market fit. Unfortunately or fortunately, we're all humans as well, which means that there's limits to what our physical bodies, our psyche can manage on a day-to-day basis. So I thought on this week on the podcast, we'll actually talk about how we get hold of this thing called work-life balance, whether it's your own business or whether it's your career. How do we manage these aspects of our career for the long haul? And I was lucky enough that a tweet popped up on my timeline. I realized I follow an expert in the field, so I'm very excited to say with me on my Skype call today is Monique Valcour, who's an executive coach, management academic, Harvard Business Review contributor, to talk about this very relevant topic. Monique, thank you very much for joining us all the way from France, I believe.
That's right. Thank you, Kevin. I'm happy to be here.
Monique, work-life balance, we've heard about it a lot. I guess a lot of industries, including finance and tech, talk about it. I've noticed that there's been, every year there seem to be more and more rumblings, and there seem to be a lot of pressure within companies, right through the ranks to create a culture and address this thing on the organizational level called work-life balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned in your intro, these things like escape velocity and so forth, I'm sure that your listeners are very familiar with the demands of being constantly connected to their businesses and to the world of technology, needing to be always taking in new information and staying on top of the latest developments. And especially if you're in the startup world, the demands of getting your business up and running can mean that you are continuously on. So that's something that more and more people are really experiencing as a sense of sometimes overwhelm. Even if you love what you're doing, you may find that you're not able to take care of yourself physically the way you'd like to, or you don't have time to invest in relationships or activities outside of work like you'd like to, or that you're really hooked to your technology and you have a hard time putting it down. So between that and between the fact that many of us are working across multiple time zones, and that we feel, that we really just can't afford to stop it all, it means that a lot of us are really getting overwhelmed. And so that's what I'm trying to push back against, and to help people find that right fit of being able to really invest in your success, in your business, and in your career, and also really thrive as a person.
I think also it's a lot of people that are attracted to startups are what's used to be called a type A personality. I don't know if that's a term that's still used, but it's in my understanding, it's people that are very driven, are very outcomes focused, and their value system is very much about achievement and moving forward. And someone once gave me a great tip where I said I struggle to. When I've got so much work to do, I struggle to make time for myself or for exercise or things like that. And this person said, well, you need to trick your mind. Instead of saying that you're going for a run to exercise, you need to actually say you're going for a run to actually work on your business, because if you're more well rested and your system's in better shape, you're going to actually be able to do better work. So you're actually tricking your mind according to your own value system, which tends to suit type A personalities, which is if their value system is achievement and if they're very aspirational. Are those type of techniques or approaches good ways for people to, in a way, trick themselves to achieve a balanced state which is much more sustainable?
Absolutely. I think that's a great piece of advice. I wouldn't necessarily frame it as tricking yourself. I would say frame it as making a choice to do what you care about most. And what you said about really aligning what you're doing, your actions, with your deeply held values is very much, a successful strategy that you can adapt to lots of different types of tasks. So just as you've indicated, if you find it challenging to set aside the time to exercise, but you can reframe that mentally as you're actually serving the goals that you care about most, that's a great way to do it. And you're mentioning that there is a prevalence of type A people who are very achievement oriented, who thrive on a high level of activity in the tech world and in the startup world. And you also, of course, have a lot of people who are getting into startups because they really want to be determining their own way of life. And maybe they're coming out of a large company where they've been working for a while and finding that they don't want to be in that type of organizational system. And they want to define for themselves a firm that's going to have a culture that matches them, that's going to allow them to structure their life the way they want to. So that's another set of motivations, and that's another set of values that you can use to invoke and to align with the activities that you really want to devote time to. So in general, as a principle, that's a fantastic way to proceed.
Monique, what does the latest research show as a company is the best way to approach a work-life balance? Is it to have a strict 9 to 5 and create that almost as a policy so that people go home, rest up, and at least do one full day of work? Is it best to give them a lot of flexibility and let them determine? And there's so many schools of thoughts. Some companies, they pride themselves on the, in even industries like investment banking, where they pride themselves on working till late at night. Who knows? I think one thing that sometimes people forget is productivity. I don't know how productive some of these extreme work cultures actually are. Is there any research around productivity and versus actually, because as a business owner, what we're looking at achieving is enabling people to do their best work for the long haul in a way that doesn't burn them out?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah, there is a ton of work on, ton of research on how you can best support employees to have high job performance and well-being. And I've done some of that research myself, and a lot more of it has been done by colleagues and is continuing to be done. And I would say that the most important takeaway, to my mind, from that research is that regardless of what policies you put in place, what truly determines how well people are and how well people perform is not the external policies or benefits, but it's really the underlying management culture. Because what happens is, you may have an organization that has put in place, we have, flex time, or we have a child care center for employees who have children, and, you have the ability to take a sabbatical, et cetera. But if there's an underlying culture, as, for example, in investment banking, one of the fields you referenced, that says, well, only serious, people, the only people who take advantage of these things are people who are not serious about their careers. What that does is it really negates the potential impact of those having those policies in place. So really the most important thing is, how does the founder, how do the senior leaders, what's their basic philosophy in terms of human motivation? How do they see their employees? How do they treat their employees? And to my mind, I've spent about 20 years looking at these questions and also working with different companies. And while it is pretty beneficial to think through what kinds of policies can we put in place to support our workforce and help them to thrive and perform, I end up doing a lot of work with leaders to really dig down and get at how to help them be more empathically connected to their employees and understand at a more visceral level what kind of energy they're pumping into their employees, or conversely, if they're de-energizing their employees, that's something that is a big factor for burning employees out.
Is there any research or discussion around perhaps a mix of the two scenarios where you go through periods where people perhaps enjoy burning the midnight oil and there's a special project, but on the flip side, then there's a great release and going into cruise mode for a while? It's something I think about a lot because I sort of look at nature, right? And nature has, it's almost like, I think of its sine wave cycles. You have storms and then calms, calm before the storm, calm after the storm, but you have the storms. And I'm wondering if somewhere in the middle, where people, particularly aspirational people, do enjoy buckling down and being hyper focused and hyper committed, but then afterwards they actually need a period to re-energize before the next wave comes along.
Yeah, that's a great observation, Kevin, and it's very true, both in terms of the fact that people do need to re-energize, renew, and then they're ready for another sprint. And also that if you look at things on a longer term basis, over the course of a person's working life, we go through different stages in our careers. And it's very typical, kind of the dominant way to be working when you're in your 20s and early 30s is in this mode of really achievement-centered work, looking to learn as much as possible, to advance, to build. And oftentimes people are invested most heavily in their career at that stage in time. And then as people are in their late 30s, 40s, people are having children, they're building families, they might also be engaging in their larger community or with their larger families, et cetera. People are often and they've kind of established a certain level of mastery, a certain level of achievement in their careers. They tend to be looking for more of a sense of integration and balance. And then when you look at people who are in the later years of their career, what often becomes most important is to have a sense of doing work that's really meaningful. And that may be that people are mentoring younger people. They're really trying to influence the development of new leaders in their technology or in their industry, or they may be, serving in leadership roles or on boards to help to shape the vision of future technologies, or they may be looking at solidifying a sense of legacy of what they've done. So people do tend to move through this progression of achievement and learning to balance and integration to a sense of meaning and purpose. So that those sine waves are, they occur on different frequencies, essentially. You can have people saying, okay, I'm going to really sprint for the next 9 months while we take this company public, and then I'm going to, try and step back a little bit, go out into nature or, run a marathon or something, and then come back in strong.
I think that's what some people in our industry, they get the one part right where it's, we do have to be very committed to get this escape velocity. But if you don't fill yourself up on the other end, burnout is just, it's almost just a given, and then it's all over. And that's what I say to some of my friends. I just say you have to replenish yourself somehow, no matter what you're going through. It's just, if the outcome you want is productivity and getting somewhere, somehow at some time you have to fill yourself up back a little bit. It's a law of physics in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a lot of different ways to fill yourself up. I mean, one of the things that I work with a lot with my clients is to really look at your energy resources as a human being, and where is it, that you really need to reinvest. For some people, it's just you can burn out because you're just working too many hours. You're just not getting enough sleep. You're not getting out of the office. You're not eating well. You're not taking care of your body, etc. For other people, it can be that you are not having enough powerful social connections. There are people who are okay in terms of their stamina, but they may find that they've lost their sense of mission, or that their work doesn't have the same kind of motivational potential as it did before. And, that at that stage, it may be not so much a question of taking a break and going away, but of refocusing on how to bring back into your work what it was that got you feeling excited about it in the first place, or shifting a little bit what your focus is, putting yourself perhaps into more direct contact with your end users so that you can really appreciate to a greater extent what kind of an impact you're having. So there are different ways in which people's energy can get run down, and depending upon what your profile is, what sort of stress you might be experiencing, there are different remedies for really bringing yourself back to peak performance and peak motivation.
Do you find, people like to talk about anecdotally the different attitudes and approaches in different countries, Australia versus the US versus Europe versus China, etc. Do you find there is a difference on the cultural level, or it's something that every culture perhaps likes to think that they're the most hard-working culture? I do find that a little bit. People just, in Australia, we're lucky enough to have people from all sorts of countries, and a lot of people say, X, Y, Z country, we're known for our hard workers. I hear that from a lot of different nationalities.
Yeah, no, there are absolutely important national cultural differences that have a big impact on the kind of work habits that get established and essentially where people draw meaning. So Australia tends to, as with many Anglo countries, Australia, the US, Canada, the UK to a certain extent, are countries that tend to be fairly individualistic in nature, where achievement is valued, where you have a sense of, everybody can make it or fail on their own merits, whereas other countries, have much more of a collectivist orientation, and their identity is drawn more from the group that you belong to, the organization that you belong to, and what you are accomplishing collectively. And there's also a real difference across countries in the extent to which people are very much focused on achievement versus focused on, building the collective group. So you look at, say, the Nordic countries, where there's much less of a culture of long work hours. And that's, that's less the case in Europe generally than in Anglo countries, but it really varies within Europe quite a bit as well. So you look to the Nordic countries, and they really do take very seriously the idea that, no, we're going to, keep the hours to a reasonable level. There really aren't that many people who are pulling the kind of crazy hours you would see in New York or probably in Sydney.
I believe in Japan, you can't leave the office if your superior is still in the office, and there's a culture there of working extremely late. I'm not sure how productive it is, but it's definitely they work till all hours, and you definitely can't leave until your direct manager above you has left the office.
That's right. And in fact, they have that term that you've probably heard before, karoshi, which is death by overwork. So there's a lot of, Japanese salarymen who are putting in incredibly long hours. And then, you might have a social obligation to go out and drink or go to karaoke with your boss at the end of the day. So it really can be completely all-consuming work environment.
And death by overwork is a thing, right? I think there's been a couple of cases in New York where young investment bankers have actually literally, they've passed away. I don't know if it's from a heart attack or just from sheer exhaustion. Or I think there's a few cases there which have forced some policy changes in those companies.
Yes, absolutely. There was a pretty high profile one in London a few years ago as well, an intern in investment banking who died after pulling several all-nighters. And so those types of things, you look at something like investment banking say surgery and medicine, where there really is an occupational culture of, you're expected to be almost superhuman. And that doing that work of, going day after day after day with very little sleep it becomes really part of your identity. But unfortunately, occupational identity isn't enough to overcome the realities of your physiology. So we do see plenty of examples in those extreme work hour occupations of people running into serious medical problems.
I grew up in South Africa, and the medical profession there was just like in a lot of countries, the training process was very rigorous. And there was a case where a young medical intern was leaving from an overnight shift on the way home from hospital and actually fell asleep at the wheel and had an accident and died. Mm-hmm. So, that caused a big debate there. So this type of thing is real, and even in our industry, in the tech industry, developers have to be really fresh-minded, on top of their game. Otherwise, it really trickles down to productivity. And I think what we always have to ask ourselves is, are we being productive? The trap of being busy,
yes,
and feeling busy or looking like we're busy. But are we actually being productive? And we really have to be honest with ourselves, because sometimes when we're tired or we're pushing ourselves, we're better off just leaving it, until the next day. It's hard to do sometimes, particularly if you're in, I wouldn't say crisis, but if there's a lot of pressure to deliver or get something out the door, it's really hard to leave it and come back to it tomorrow. Even if you know on some level that is the better thing to do, there's this human drive to just keep at it and try and make progress on it.
For sure, yeah, and there's a real culture too of busyness. I'm American, as you can tell from my accent. I've been living in France since 2009, but I can remember living in the U.S. that when you would say to somebody, "Hello, how are you?" it would be more likely that they would say, "Oh, I'm so busy," instead of "I'm well." So it becomes a lot of times like a badge of honor that people draw a sense of their own meaning or their identity from just how many plates they're spinning at the same time. And sometimes having that frenetic pace is partly, it can become quite insidious. Everybody else is doing it. It seems like, oh, this is just how we operate. Some companies get into the mode of actually operating that way. There are some companies that just run in continual crisis mode, and it's like people get kind of an adrenaline buzz off of it. But it's true that it is not very sustainable over the long run. So, particularly when you're working with a team that you really work well with, that you enjoy your team members, you enjoy your work, you're intellectually excited by it, it's very easy to push it too hard. So there has to be both, individuals being in touch with kind of how am I doing, where's my energy, how well am I performing, and where do I need to, what do I need to do to maintain that? And sometimes that means, stepping back a little bit and slowing down. And also in companies, part of what you need to do if you're a leader is to be taking the pulse of the energy level in your firm and make sure that you're not burning people out, because it's easy to really run the engine too hot.
It is, and as an owner entrepreneur, definitely aware that temptation is I wouldn't say temptation, but particularly times of challenge where you want to get over some humps. It's easy to lose sight of the big picture. We've got a term in Australia where people, I don't know if it's used in America, but a lot of the time when you ask people how you're doing, they'll say flat out.
Yeah, right.
So that's we hear that a lot.
Yeah.
So I do think I mean one of the points you brought up, that a lot of people do enjoy working with their teams and the projects that they are on. I do think actually, in the Western world, particularly in a lot of white collar jobs, a lot of people do actually enjoy what they do, and they actually do get meaning from it, and they may take that a little bit too far at the price of some other aspects of their life.
Yep, for sure. And it's also, if everybody else around you is doing the same thing, it can seem as though there actually is no choice, that this is just the way of the world. I spent, as you mentioned at the outset, my primary activity at this point in time is as a coach, but I spent about 15 years working as a management professor, on the tenure track and tenured. And in that world, in academia, there's just this constant pressure to, anytime you're not dealing with, teaching or meeting with students, et cetera, that you have to be working on your research, because you've got to publish, keep publishing. And it's really easy to fall into a trap where you feel like you just can't ever stop working on that. And so it's been, I realized once I stepped back a little bit from that particular culture, that I truly hadn't even had a real weekend where I wasn't either going off and spending a couple hours doing email or doing a little bit of edits or taking care of some task. And I just constantly had it on my mind as well. I really was never able to let go of work. So it's been really liberating to learn how to do that better in my career currently.
And despite the physical impacts that we spoke about, there's obviously mental health impacts in the startup world. A few years ago in LA and San Francisco, there was a real spate of suicides in our industry. Terribly tragic, and mostly young or youngish people. Not that it's makes it any difference, but and there was a lot of discussion about the pressure, the work pressure, the expectations, even the fact that you have to be showing success to your staff, your investors, the press, no matter what's going on, working crazy hours, and that deteriorates the mental health, or it can do. And if people are not checking in with themselves or being self-aware to replenish themselves or counterbalance that just it can be a train wreck.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, that you emphasize that there was a lot of this, that there were suicides among young people, because there's also, particularly like Silicon Valley and LA, the West Coast of the US, it is a real culture of youth as well. And I've even heard of men in their early 30s who are feeling like they need to have some sort of cosmetic surgery because they're afraid that they're starting to be seen as, over the hill, as not as kind of vibrant as they previously were as their younger colleagues. So it's crazy how that kind of culture can take over.
And I think what can really help, I know what helps me is, the word perspective. It's thrown around a bit, but it really does help. If it's so easy, particularly if it's your own business or you're working in a startup, it's so easy to start feeling like that your entire existence and meaning and you're defined by this thing. But if you actually spend time with people on the weekend in other industries or do charity work or lucky enough to travel to other places or go camping, you actually do get this wonderful perspective that no matter what happens in the business, in the professional life, the good or the bad that happens, life is going to go on. I've got other options, and I've just, as important as it is, I need to maintain perspective that, it isn't a life and death situation, even though it may feel like that sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And, I mean, what you're saying, like going out into nature, camping, something like that, you really do get reminded that, yeah, this planet is turning independently of you personally. And, you could vanish tomorrow and it, the larger world would remain as it is. So it is good to be able to step back a little bit and have a different view on your activity.
The sun always rises, right? I mean, one day it won't in 10 billion years or something, but at the moment, I think we can be rest assured that no matter whether we launch the product or not, the new product, the sun is always going to rise.
Right, exactly.
Monique Valcour, executive coach, management academic, Harvard Business Review contributor. Really appreciate you staying up late at night for us. A great chat, important topic, and thank you for joining us on the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Kevin.
The It's a Monkey podcast is brought to you by CheckDog. Use CheckDog to easily review and monitor your website for spelling errors, broken links, and broken images, all with the push of one button. CheckDog can also automatically monitor your website and notify you of newly introduced spelling errors. Go to checkdog.com/podcast to receive 50% off your first month subscription. CheckDog.com, helping the world's leading websites keep their content error-free.
Kate, do you and your friends talk about work-life balance, or when you guys were at university, did you factor that in a lot? Was it a discussion?
Not particularly. I mean, it sort of comes up now that everyone's sort of got full-time jobs and working away. Some people are in jobs they don't necessarily like. And part of the reason they don't like it is because it dominates their life so much. They feel like they have to get into work really, really early and stay super late, and then they don't have time to do the things that they want to do. So, yeah, I think it sort of comes into play later. You don't think about it when you're studying.
Yeah, I think I was trying to think back. I mean, I did uni a long time ago, and, admittedly I was with a group of type A people, and so it wasn't, it's not really representative, I guess. But I can't remember ever talking about the work-life balance. I think things were also different in South Africa, where people just wanted to crack on and get ahead. It was more like America, where you're either sort of at the bottom or you more towards the top. The middle ground was very thin there. So it was, no healthcare, no public transport. You had to, there were a lot of expenses that you initially had to cover. So there was a lot of pressure. Whereas in Australia, it's you got healthcare covered, you got transport covered. I think I love Australia. It's probably one of the best countries to be middle class, for lack of a better word, and it's not such a bad option. Where in some other countries that there is not much of a middle class. So I think it didn't seem to come on our radar much. That being said, today, as we spoke about in the interview, it is very relevant, even just for sustainability. I'm sure some of your friends perhaps think about leaving just because at some stage, because they get burnt out, right?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of it too is just not feeling appreciated, I guess, and needed is another core one. I mean, some people seem to like that, the 9 to 5, and it's just a job, they live for the weekend. But a lot of people still want to find purpose in what they're doing.
I think most people do. I think even more so. I think in the West these days, where there's a breakdown of community and there's a lot of individualism, and even the things such as a nuclear family and religion and all of that's so unusual, that a lot of people get their meaning through work, right? And maybe in the old days they'd go to church on the weekend. Maybe some people do, but it's become more rare. Maybe there was communities, but these days people get a lot of their worth out of work, and if their work isn't lining up, they look at changing that, and part of that is to have that sweet spot of work-life balance. I believe humans enjoy working hard in areas that they enjoy and they feel they can make progress at. I really believe that they all enjoy it, but I think there's a sweet spot, and beyond that sweet spot, it becomes a grind. And I think when it heads into that grind, that's when the problem starts.
Yeah. Monique made a good point too, that motivation changes depending on how old you are. So when you're younger, I do feel that people get a lot more out of their job because it's more important to them and it's sort of a bigger aspect of their life than, say, someone who works part-time and looks after their children the other part-time. And their children obviously take a huge percent of their motivation and what they care about, and their values are higher for family than they are for work.
Yeah, it definitely impacts, the phase of life. And I guess some companies, big companies, traditionally, I think it's changing, but traditionally they've exploited that. Some big corporates where they bring in tons of young people and work them to the bone and for a year and so that they can get the brand on their resume, and then bring in another batch and burn them out. And
I've heard about this a lot, like lately actually, people working for big companies and not necessarily getting paid what they're worth. But yeah, they just use their name and the fact that you've worked for that particular brand as the leverage.
I went for an interview many, many, many years ago for an internet company, one of the first ones. I will not mention names. And I was having a chat with a guy, and he took me into this cool office, and we were sitting on bean bags, and he proudly declared, he said, "We don't pay market rate salaries. We pay below market rate because we believe this is a cool place to work." Yeah, it was very, very strange. This was in the heady days of the .com as well, right? Yeah. This is where the laws of physics were going crazy. But I found that was a very strange statement to make, Yeah. And I think the industry's matured since then, where people aren't stupid. Gimmicks don't work, right? A ping pong table's not going to make up for the lack of challenging projects or good team members. Those are all nice to haves. Sure. It's fantastic that Google has great food and I've been to the campus in Mountain View, and they got like a beach volleyball thing there, and it's really nice but it's not going to, at the end of the day, most of the time you're sitting working, right? And you're working with your peers and you're doing interesting projects. And by the way, that it wasn't Google, that company. So
okay.
just to put it out there, it wasn't Google. So I don't think Google would do something as silly as that. But gimmicks don't give you meaning as well.
No. I mean, they probably work as a lure for a lot of people. They think, oh, it's nice. And even if you just go for your interview and you see these things, you think, oh, this is an impressive place to be, and I want to be in this space. But, are they the type of things that are going to keep someone around? Probably not.
Yeah, I think people, especially in our industry, but in general, in our industry, people are smart. They can see through BS,
Yeah.
And and that stuff is nice, but it's I think a job is very much around the people you work with, the projects that you have, and a place that you can do your best work. I try to create a culture and an environment and the projects where people can do their best work. That I believe that's where everyone, what everyone wants to some degree is to be able to do their best work. And it's creating cultures. It's tough. It's a very slippery thing. Humans are not cookie cutter, and culture's a product of the CEO, and it's also a product of everyone else in there as well, right?
Yeah,
so
it's a mix.
It's a mix, and there's feedback loops everywhere, and it's quite tricky to create that. And some companies really get it right, and some not so much. And it's a work in progress. But I know that Basecamp, David Hannemeyer Hansen's company, they very much say we're strictly 9 to 5. I like that. They're at a very mature part of their evolution as well, though. I think when you're trying to achieve escape velocity, sometimes it's all hands on deck, and we're trying to compress time, and sometimes that means longer hours, and sometimes it can be fun to a certain degree, as I spoke about in the interview, as long as there's a rejuvenation period.
Yeah.
But it is quite nice to have that as a policy, and you don't get this funny situation where people are just staying late to look good.
Yes.
No.
Well, you're not. I think you mentioned it actually in the interview about. I think it was Japanese.
Yes, Japanese
They
culture.
can't leave before their
Superior.
direct manager.
Yeah. Which, yeah. But there's big cultural reasons for that. But anyway, you've been listening to episode number 82. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope you've enjoyed the show. You can tweet us. You can email us. We love hearing from you. And please check back every Friday or Saturday. We get these podcasts out. Remember, you can subscribe with iTunes. You can subscribe on Stitcher. You can use your podcast app on Android. If you subscribe to it via the RSS feed, then it just pops in every week and you can just get it on demand. So why don't you do that? And you can go to itsamonkey.com to get links to all the stories and even comment on the show. We'll be back next week with another podcast episode. And thanks as always to Kate for being my co-host. And we'll see you next week.
See ya.